afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Historical Society again. Tradition has it that we like to bring history to our membership right about this time, and to do so generally to our country's beginnings. Now, specifically, beginnings would mean that was around the 1770s. This is the time of the American Revolution. And when possible, the topic that we talk about is local history. And I tend to define local history, if you will, as all of New England, of Connecticut, and especially of our town. All these locations seem to weave their way through my personal interests as well as the topic matter. Hopefully, this will be of interest to you all. Now, on this occasion, we're stretching things a little bit as the Benedict Arnold topic matter goes beyond Canaan Parish. Canaan Parish, of course, our community's name before 1801. There's no evidence that Arnold either came here or crossed over our borders. The closest I can come up with would be 1 mile, but you simply cannot read about the Revolutionary War without running into Arnold's nearby heroics, as well as the events in the build-up to his treason. Now, as for the title of this talk, I have a coffee group, and they helped me with naming tasks. Years back, it was Alexander Hamilton, which had a title of Hamilton before Broadway, and that had a certain ring. And we settled this time around the title of American Betrayal because it seemed to suggest Arnold's dual or infamous two-sidedness. He was once a hero warrior, and then he turned traitor. And he did so all within the short period of time of 1775 to 1780. The entire Arnold story, as usual, tends to be on the long side, and I've skimped. And I skimped mostly on Arnold's early adventures so as to dwell more on why he changed sides. Now, for starters, Arnold was sort of local. He was from Connecticut, namely New Haven, and he wanted to go to Yale. But that didn't work out for him. It did, however, work out for someone else who we'll get around to in about 40 minutes. Arnold became a shipping merchant, and he was very successful. He did so without a Yale degree. And during his early career, he showed his patriotism by opposing the infamous British Stamp Act. And he did this by intentionally failing to pay duty to King George on the goods that Arnold, brought in from the West Indies. Now, I reckon that made him a good guy, and at least for a little while. Perhaps the next notable patriotic happening was when he and Ethan Allen, that's Ethan Allen of the Green Mountain Boys, bloodlessly captured British Fort Ticonderoga on Lake Champlain. Now, with the Brits accordingly expelled from Fort Ticonderoga, this made possible the hauling of Ticonderoga's captured cannons and munitions by American Colonel Henry Knox over to Boston. Now, these cannons were used to reinforce the American siege on that British-held city. This success immediately, by the way, followed the initial 1775 clashes at Lexington and Concord. And Knox's trek all the way from Ticonderoga to Boston was across frozen New England, and it took him 7 weeks to get those cannons to Boston. And the arrival, in fact, did lead to the British evacuation of Beantown. Now, all this time, that is simultaneously, 2 American generals, Arnold and Montgomery, were executing a very ambitious two-pronged invasion of British-held Canada. Now, their avowed purpose was to induce English-speaking Canadians to join the 13 colonies against King George. Arnold's part was to capture Quebec City, and he got there by going up Maine's Kennebec River, sort of in the back door. It was an ill-conceived venture, and it was done in the dead of winter, late 1775-76, and he started out with some 1,200 soldiers, but half of them dropped out, and the remaining 600 that did finish were largely all in a very sort of state of exhaustion. Now, the Montgomery salient, on the other hand, was aimed at Montreal, and it was quickly successful. That is, Montreal was captured with only minor losses. Montgomery himself then goes downriver, that's the St. Lawrence River, to help Arnold's men at the ramparts of the Quebec citadel. And this time, the combined attack was not so successful. Among other things, Montgomery got himself killed, and Arnold in turn takes a bullet at Quebec in his left leg. So, the siege on Quebec City fails, and Arnold, with all his troops, is forced to withdraw, first to Montreal and then totally out of Canada to the lower Lake Champlain. And to do so, they go there to lick their wounds and to regroup. Now, we will talk more about Arnold's Quebec wounding because it importantly comes much to play in the cause of his eventual treason. The lifting of the ineffective siege on Quebec City takes place in the spring of 1776, just before our Declaration of Independence. Arnold's next foray is on Lake Champlain itself. His retreat from Canada to Fort Ticonderoga, which is at the south end of a 125-mile lake, is where he builds a navy. Now get this. The Navy is essentially of rowboats, each with a single mast and a sail. Arnold anticipates an eventual British invasion from Canada into the American colonies by way of Lake Champlain and then to Lake George and ultimately the Hudson River corridor. Arnold's fleet first works its way back up to the north, where he sets up an ambush among Champlain's many coves and islands. And once so situated, he waits for the Brits in turn to bring their navy down the waterway. Arnold does not have to wait very long because he's tucked in behind Valcour Island, which is near today's Burlington, and a lake battle ensues wherein Arnold gets beaten once more, but not without inflicting a costly blow on British General Carleton. Carleton is now leading the King's forces. It's sort of an American win, nonetheless, because this time the British are forced to retreat back into Canada and to do so for the entire winter. This is a meaningful delay that takes place. Also, it's a welcome time for patriot regrouping. Now, here's a quick trivia question, gang. What famous American general was also an admiral? Well, I guess you've guessed it. The Battle of Valcour Island. Okay, I know that's a bit of a stretch, if you will, but actually, we as a country really had no navy back in 1776, just a lot of big rowboats. Okay, the next step in the Arnold Odyssey after a critical delaying action on upper Lake Champlain is a perceived promotion on his part to Major General. Arnold next heads to where this is most apt to get him a promotion, that being with Washington's Continental Army in New Jersey. Washington was having his own troubles in the fall of 1776. He had suffered setbacks in both New York and New Jersey. Nonetheless, it's about this time that our leader, meaning Washington, realizes that he has a very exceptional officer in his upstate command, an officer who demonstrates that he wants to fight. And Arnold's recent exploits became twofold to Washington. As mentioned, Arnold stops the British for a time on the lake itself and then brings 500 veteran soldiers to the struggling Continental Army in New Jersey. That troop addition proves to be just in time for our December successes that we had at Trenton and Princeton. Arnold, however, is not involved in those New Jersey scraps because Washington needs him elsewhere. He is to report as soon as possible to Rhode Island, where his leadership is wanted against British-held Newport. Okay, we're now in the winter of 1776-77. It is in Rhode Island where we begin to evidence a different Benedict Arnold. He is incurring ballooning debt. His spendthrift ways become very apparent. He's 36-year-old widower and falls in love with a girl half his age. Her name is Elizabeth, and she lives up in Boston. She is the daughter of a wealthy Boston loyalist. Now, Arnold's courting of this lady makes his money fly even faster. He started out in New Haven as a merchant. He had a young fortune at that time from his shipping, but that fortune is soon gone. The luxuries of Boston and Rhode Island proved much too extravagant, but despite his going down the money hole, he still covets military advancement. And one way to do this is to really become a Navy admiral, and to do so by going after coveted prize money. Prize money was what was called capturing British merchant vessels on the Atlantic Ocean, capturing them and then sharing the loot with the crew. It was a very profitable venture. Well, that idea did not come to pass any more than Yale did. And at the same time, he gets bypassed for his hoped-for Army promotion to Major General. Washington, it seems, cannot help him with rank jumps, since it is Congress alone that does the appointing of generals. So, Arnold suffers a bout of humiliation, primarily from watching 5 of his lesser peers get promotions and move past him in rank, all of them moving to Major General. This is yet another perceived disgrace that doesn't sit very well. It triggers a funk wherein Arnold not only loses the 16-year-old Boston lass, but also his relatively plush yet expensive Rhode Island assignment. In other words, he gets himself fired. It seems that Washington can dismiss generals, but he can't promote them. Now, Arnold's next stop is New Haven. New Haven, his hometown. He bunks in with his sister Hannah and his 3 sons. And I'd say at this point he's in a total state of mortification from these Rhode Island setbacks. Arnold finds himself not the old hero of your early days. He's not the talk of the town, and he has no pocketbook to speak of. But guess what? Things turn around again, and this is where Canaan Parish marginally comes into play. Well, almost. Arnold misses us by 1 mile. Now, this next event is April of 1777. The Brits, under General Tryon, execute a surprise attack on Connecticut, on our nearby neighbor Danbury. Washington has a very important military supply post up in Danbury, and Arnold learns about the British invasion at Campo Beach, Westport today, and he leaves his New Haven family and rushes to cut off the 2,000 redcoat invaders before they can return to their ships in Norwalk Harbor. Arnold, however, is too late to prevent the sacking and burning of Danbury, but he is in time to head off the retreating Brits at Ridgefield. Now, this is April of 1777. It's still early in the war. A hasty barricade is built by Arnold at the north end of Ridgefield's Town Street, which the veteran British Marines quickly break down with their vaunted artillery. Canaan Parish, by the way, our own militia are part of this skirmish. This is despite Arnold's fearless leadership and bravery. He has a horse shot out from under him. He avoids capture and escapes south ahead of his pursuers down through Wilton. Now, going to Wilton, the road he takes to Wilton is now Connecticut Route 33. And by my reckoning, this brought the general, who has a new horse at this point, within 1 mile of Canaan Parish. That is our extreme northeast corner. Anyway, Arnold's troops next make a stand at Campo Hill in Norwalk, with Arnold still barking out orders and fighting valiantly. And it is here that the banged-up Brits embark back to New York. They've at least learned not to mess around with inland Connecticut again. Now, before we get to the big betrayal at West Point, we've got to touch on the battle that swings the overall conflict, that is, the overall war in our direction, the Battle of Saratoga. The British Canadian Army is now under General Johnny Burgoyne, and they start their much delayed incursion down the vaunted Lake Corridor. So, starting in Upper Vermont, it's down Lake Champlain to first recapture Ticonderoga, then the short portage over to Lake George, and hence to the upper Hudson River. And their goal is Albany, and then on to British-held New York City. If this proves to be successful on Burgoyne's part, the invasion will split the 13 colonies and should bring the war to an end. But not so fast. Burgoyne even fails to make it to Albany. Once again, Arnold springs into fearless action. We're now in Saratoga, gang. It's fall of 1777, and this time it's General Horatio Gates, not Arnold, who gets the nod to fight Burgoyne. Arnold becomes number 2 in command. At first, this combination works out, but not for very long. Gates and Arnold simply don't click. There are 2 separate battles that take place at Saratoga, Freeman Farm, then Bemis Heights. Unfortunately, Gates's troops are well rested, whereas Burgoyne's, as mentioned, are not so. Burgoyne has a supply chain unable to keep up with him, and as such, food becomes in short supply. The American side, however, is adding new, well-fed troops on a daily basis. Importantly, these troops are coming from Connecticut, and Connecticut, as you know, was considered Washington's main provision state. Now, let me backtrack a minute. I left out the fact that Arnold did get promoted to Major General, mainly because of his intrepid doings at Danbury and Ridgefield. And it was John Adams, the senator at that time in Congress, who slid that rank improvement through. This congressional appointment, however, puts Washington in an almost impossible situation. The chief wanted Arnold to lead the entire Saratoga campaign, but the decision to go with Gates had already been made by the lawmakers. Being second in command to Gates is not good enough for Arnold. He sees Gates as less deserving and threatens to resign, only to be talked out of it by Washington. So a very clumsy combination evolves, wherein Major General Arnold only gets command of Saratoga's left flank. So what happens in no time at all is a complete falling out with Major General Gates. Arnold goes on to being outstanding in the Saratoga field, both encounters. He makes the difference in the critical American victory, and does so despite disobeying Gates's stringent orders to get lost. Credit for the Saratoga win nonetheless still goes to Gates because he was the commanding officer. And here we have another instance of Arnold being disregarded and leading to yet another fit of his ongoing anger to higher ups. Okay, just a little bit more on Saratoga. Saratoga is not just an American win, but it's a decisive win, a turning point. It gave the French nation reason to enter the American fray on our much-needed side. Arnold, however, takes yet another bullet in Saratoga in his already wounded left leg. The new wound this time renders him virtually unserviceable to the American military. But Washington comes to the rescue once again and rewards him with a soft position in British evacuated Philadelphia, and to be there as the military commander. It's a plum job for the infirmed general. However, it's a virtual repeat of his days back in Rhode Island. This time it provides business possibilities and a lucrative post for someone who understands the world of business. It is Philadelphia then where Arnold really starts to change allegiances and go bad. A good, soft life, and guess what? Here enters another teenage lady for him to court, the beautiful Peggy Shippen, a daughter of yet another wealthy merchant and an ardent loyalist to boot. Yes, Peggy's family were quiet loyalists, now residing in an American city that is no longer British. This development is vital to our main topic today of why Arnold went bad. A marriage does come about in April of 1779, but it should be noted that Peggy Shippen is one smart young lady, very attractive and with extra strong ties still to the British causes. And here we see a primary building stone leading to Arnold's eventual betrayal of our country. Peggy has expensive tastes that simply don't mesh with someone with waning monies. She has a powerful swaying way with Benedict of her own loyalist convictions. Now, another matter that enters at this point is a gambling curse starts to figure in. And this is a growing addiction to Benedict Arnold with no easy way to correct. And his business dealings carelessly get mixed with official army duties, resulting in a serious charge of improper personal profiteering. Arnold now faces the disgrace, if you will, of a full-blown military court-martial. And although he's mostly acquitted, this time Washington publicly rebukes him for his egregious conduct. And in a fit of pique, Arnold resigns the Philly Post, claiming that Washington and Congress were robbing him of the credit that he had already earned from Quebec, Valcourt, Ridgefield, Saratoga, and elsewhere. His bitterness with fellow officers continues to compound the anger. Even revenge starts to creep in. And here we see the beginning of a clandestine correspondence that he starts with British Major John Andre in New York City. Andre is, by the way, a former beau of Peggy in Philadelphia. He is in charge now of British intelligence in America, but stationed in New York. But Andre sees a golden opportunity to turn Arnold's allegiance to King George, and it works. Arnold makes clear his dissatisfaction with the Patriot cause and even with Washington himself. He tells Andre he will swear an oath to the king and turn coat. His terms to come over will be big money and an equal rank in the British Army. And for this he will provide insight into Washington's strategic plans. Such written intentions are to be conveyed through Peggy and Andre and done largely in invisible ink. American troop movements and other intelligence were to be forthcoming, and the revelation that the French were secretly sending a fleet to Newport was also to be revealed. Okay, that brings us to the main event, the treason itself. Andre suggests to Arnold that he go to General Washington and seek yet another new post, one that doesn't require much leg movement. And such a post was, you guessed it, West Point. The Brits, if they could capture this American bastion, could see a way to accomplish what Burgoyne failed at in 1777 at Saratoga. Now, let it be said that Washington considered West Point as his most important post in America. But despite Arnold's incapacity, he still valued his leadership qualities. There were some 3,000 troops defending West Point at that point, and they did so with a massive artillery component and a remarkable 65-ton iron chain strung across all of Hudson River. And all in all, the West Point facility was considered near impregnable. Now, please remember that Arnold's abrupt resignation in Philadelphia followed his court-martial. Also, the loss of a good deal of Washington's respect. Nonetheless, our Commander-in-Chief, Washington, still presents Arnold with command of the fortress. Here is where Canaan Parish sort of reappears. Many of you in this room have heard me rhapsodize over American Major Benjamin Talmadge. He was a local Yalie who became Washington's intelligence arm. He became Washington's spy chief. Talmadge is the cavalry officer that had a lookout up on our Ponus Ridge Road. Anyway, Talmadge intercepts an Andre-coded message to Arnold about a British plot to infiltrate Washington's command. Washington is duly warned at this point. But all this time, Arnold is working on the detailed drawings of his new West Point command, the blueprint, if you will, of the fortress itself to give to the Brits. And simultaneously, he is exchanging numerous coded messages with British General Clinton in New York, and that's being done through Andre. Anyway, Arnold's price for the drawings of West Point was 20,000 pounds, money that he needed still to reduce his substantial personal debts. Andre and Clinton agree to Arnold's terms, signed, sealed, and delivered. Now, behind the scenes is our Major Talmadge, who besides being Washington's spy chief, is also the leader of an elite Pound Ridge battalion of mounted dragoons. These horsemen intercept a few of the coded messages, causing Talmadge to become quite suspicious of Arnold's actions. He's not certain about it. He's just suspicious of the newly installed West Point general, once court-martialed. The Brits under Clinton in New York City simultaneously start preparations to attack West Point. They need only Arnold's drawings. A meeting is agreed upon whereby Andre is to go behind American lines to get the papers themselves from Arnold. Andre's told to wear his military uniform and not even think of taking it off. He is also to assume another name, that being John Anderson. Well, Andre comes up the Hudson River to Haverstraw by boat, where Arnold waits for him at nighttime. And this is where the drawings are passed to British hands, from Arnold to Andre. So it is the moment of treason. But then a mishap occurs. Andre's safe return to New York City by boat is thwarted. The boat itself leaves without him. So to reach safety, Andre must go overland by horseback, and here he chooses to change into his civilian clothes. If caught, he would now be considered a spy and not protected as would be a uniformed prisoner of war. And that's exactly what happens to Andre near today's Croton Reservoir, just short of safe British lines. 3 patriots nab him, and a search of Mr. Anderson finds suspicious papers hidden in his boot. One of Andre's captors, however, smells a spy on hand, and he decides to turn Anderson now over to the Americans. So it's off to the nearest American military post, which happened to be in North Castle, and North Castle is Armonk today. And here a Colonel Jameson is in charge. Jameson reports directly to Arnold at West Point. But Jameson now sees the incriminating papers and decides to send both the prisoner and the papers to Arnold at West Point, and do so by armed guard. This, however, gets stopped, and this is where Major Talmadge comes into play. Major Talmadge fortuitously arrives on the scene that this is all going on, and he's not so sure of what the move that Jameson is doing is smart. He convinces his ranking officer, Jameson, to only send a note to Arnold about having a prisoner at North Castle, and the name of that prisoner is Anderson. The drawings themselves are to be sent to Washington by a separate courier. Now, I tend to think this may be a bit confusing, but it wasn't to Major Talmadge. He sees Arnold's game and who John Anderson really is, and there's no getting around it. This is a scheme of betrayal. Arnold has had delivered to him just Jameson's incriminating prisoner note, whereas the West Point drawings are on their way to Washington. So the jig is up. Clearly exposed, Arnold realizes he's now a traitor, but no dope, and he immediately rushes upstairs, he kisses his wife, the newborn baby, and then he flees. All this is done just before an expected visit to West Point by Washington himself. Now, this may sound a little bit like a soap opera, but if it weren't so serious, when Washington sees Jameson's note and Arnold's drawings, this brings him to a rage and then to tears. He sends his aide, Alexander Hamilton, unsuccessfully after Arnold, who manages to escape and catch the boat that Andre had missed earlier. Okay, And hopefully I've squeezed in enough of a much longer story concerning the who's and why's of Arnold's turncoat on our country. Benedict Arnold was a one-time patriot warrior whose ambitions went completely astray. His burdensome debt, painful wounds, a powerful loyalist wife, and an ongoing bruised ego sort of tells the longer sword saga. He was a man who clearly had more concern for himself than for his once fledgling country. As a traitor, however, it is ironic that his misdeeds succeeded in galvanizing a wavering nation of Americans to the cause. Arnold's treason, said another way, fortunately awakens our people to the realization that the War of Independence was only theirs to lose. Now let me really finish here by what happened to Andre, or that is by Anderson. This is sort of local as well. Our Major Tomwich takes physical custody of the prisoner Anderson at North Castle, and he takes him away from Jameson. And he transports him first to the safer South Salem post where Andre spends the night. Then, under heavy guard, the next day he goes with the leadership of Tomwich to Tarrytown, New York, where a 12-member court of generals try and convict him as a spy. Tomwich next has the job to escort Andre all the way to his ultimate fate at Tappan, the gallows. Peggy Arnold was never charged with doing anything wrong. Washington even permits her to return to her husband now in New York. Arnold's career goes on to being a commissioned officer in the British Army, where he gives us much grief. One of his redcoat attacks is on our New London, and it's a massacre of our local militia. It's not very pretty. Arnold's final days are in England itself, where he dies in 1801 and dies without military honors. Peggy outlives him, largely settling their significant debts. Okay, well that's it, gang. The checkered path of the betrayal and the incriminating West Point event itself. Hopefully this was done within a time period that your seats could endure. Arnold was a very complex individual. Our country survived his misdeeds, and of course we went on to prevail at Yorktown in Virginia. Our founders, as you know, created a very remarkable document in 1787, the idea of a people's republic with a written constitution under which we have long prospered. And it was the likes of George Washington, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, who largely led the way for us back in the 1780s. But I'd like to add just one more overlooked name to that august grouping, that being of a sometime resident of Canaan Parish, Major Benjamin Tomwich, the guy with the outpost up on our own Ponus Ridge, and with a last name for a small railway stop on the way to Stamford.